Hi there, welcome to Module 2 of Strategic Training, Older Adult Technology Learning, where we'll be focusing in on learning dynamics across a multi-generational workforce. Now, learning dynamics includes the way we take in information and the external factors and the personality traits that we bring to the learning experience as adults. And in this module, we're going to talk to you about some known and established adult learning principles that kind of differentiates learning as we knew it as children or as young adults to later in life learning. We're also going to talk about the learner-centered approach. It may be an approach that you may have heard of or know very little about, but we're going to actually give you 7 dimensions to consider to find out if your training is more technology-centered, instructor-centered, or curriculum-centered, or are you considering the unique learning dynamics of your learners? And finally, we're going to define what is called a cognitive personality style, or what I like to say is who you are combined with what you know. So let's begin with the social learning theory. This is a theory that's been around for quite a long time, where scientists evaluated how kids would learn and what would be some of the basic components needed for learning. And in their observations, they found that people need to observe a given behavior that was modeled, let's say, by an instructor in order to learn it. So think about when you're in kindergarten and the teacher wanted you to say please and thank you. Well, you'd have to see that in practice as part of the first necessary step of learning. And then to the degree that you were paying attention, you were able to retain and in some cases reproduce that behavior. And so this goes along with what we know about corporate learning as well. We, uh, we have people that will observe, let's say, a lecture, a PowerPoint slide, a training video. And if they're paying attention, we see that it increases their ability to retain the information as we find in learning assessments, or we might see a skill being able to be reproduced. But the last step, motivation, is very important for adult learners because we find that motivation can be squashed, right, in a way, if leaders do not consider the unique traits of adult learning principles. And that's what I wanted to talk to you next. The research leads us back to Malcolm Knowles, who coined the term andragogy, or the science of adult learning. And he said that if we knew why we were learning, and if the reason fits our needs as we perceive them, then we'll learn quickly and deeply. And for those of you who are learning leaders, you know that deep and quick learning is the sign of an effective and an agile technology learning program. The learners should be actively involved in the learning process. So Malcolm talked about 5 assumptions that he had found amongst older adults that impacted every stage of their learning. And so I want to cover those with you today by starting with the self concept and how it makes us self directed in our learning habits. For older adults, we are proactive, all right? We go out and take the initiative to diagnose our own learning needs. And if we can take that medical metaphor, if we're diagnosing our learning needs, then we write ourselves a prescription by using all available resources around us to make decisions related to what is good for learning. So in order to have a more self-directed learning environment, adults need agency. They need some authentic control over their choices. Now, this might mean that you offer training at different locations or at different times of day. You let folks choose what type of online learning or what type of in-person support or how long they might need it based on employee surveys and input that you get back from your workforce or data that you get back from your digital literacy assessments. You can also consider the experience of older adults when it comes to learning because they're mature learners. They tap into an accumulated life experience as a resource for learning. In one study out of Europe, we found that when older adults were asked if they wanted to participate in new learning, and that new learning was related to something they had done before, they considered themselves lifelong learners and saw a natural progression, a natural process of what they had basically lived up to that point. In other words, they weren't resistant at all because they saw it as a natural next step in their life journey. Living was considered learning. And so the learning schema of adults is affected by an emotional component. Again, we talked about how you may have considered a certain topic, how you were told you performed in a certain topic will create emotions and a state of mind about certain ways of learning. But there's also a cognitive component, what knowledge you have at that point about that particular topic. And in many cases, older adults bring what we call transferable knowledge, things that they've learned before that have an analogous schema to what they're learning now. So the needs for an experienced learner are to have active learning experience where they can flex that learning muscle and implement solutions on examples and solve real world problems through their learning. We also find that adults are coming to the table with a readiness to learn. And what this means is that they want to develop skills and they're primed to learn what they need to learn for real life situations. Again, think about a high schooler that doesn't want to go to a writing class or doesn't want to go to PE. And as adult learners, we're not really in that same frame of mind. We're looking for training that is related to our roles and related to our day-to-day activities, which leads us to an orientation to learning. And Malcolm talked about how learning for an adult is task oriented. It's problem solving oriented, not just subject and topic learning. Again, compared to how when we were children, we went to English class, we went to writing class, we had a cooking class or a music class, simply based on our topics, we were growing our knowledge base. But now, learning is more strategic, more surgical in a way. So we need an immediacy of application, or in other words, we need to have transfer facilitated where we can use what we learned in the classroom very quickly and very effectively at our jobs. This is known as situated learning. The last characteristic and assumption that Malcolm made of adult learners talked about motivation. That last component we talked about in the social learning theory. Adults are more intrinsically or internally motivated for learning, and they do it for their personal esteem and their internal satisfaction. But motivation can be blocked by training that ignores adult learning principles. So our need here is for learning that demonstrates how training is going to make our jobs better, make us better at our jobs, or just benefit us in life in general. So this leads us to this principle of the learner-centered approach. And basically what this is about making your learning environments emphasizing the learning process and highlight the characteristics of the learner through the learning process, not just on the teacher and the characteristics of the teaching process. Now, we're not going to cover each of these in this module, but I've included this in your handbook, and it's a 7-dimension diagram. And you can begin to take an audit of your own learning resources, your own training programs, and see if they contain any of these. If you find yourself only recognizing one or two or seeing that there aren't any of these dimensions, these are opportunities for you to sit down and have conversations with your older adults about how you can incorporate these traits into your learning and how that can make that training more powerful and more effective for them. Now, I want to demonstrate how important it is to consider the older adult in the learning process by hearing from someone who is a lifelong learner and an adult learner as well as an adult educator. This is Lee Wong, and she's a mathematics instructor in New Zealand. She immigrated there from China, and she has a unique life story about her education experience and where she is now. And at the time of this video, she was creating a master's degree project for her students. And so she was implementing some unique learning approaches that were more learner-centered. So I want you to watch this video, and on the other side, I want to debrief these 4 questions. I want you to think about how did her early education experience impact her learning. Listen to some key phrases about her early life and how that might have impacted her learning. Second, how does she describe leadership support? Listen to the word choices and the language she uses to describe how her leaders support her in her learning journey. Also, how is her project learner-centered? You might hear a term flipped learning, and see if you can define that in the video. And finally, kind of gauge her overall attitude or how she frames up working with technology. Watch this video and we'll debrief on the other side.
My name name is Li Wang, and originally from China, and this is my, could be 20-something years in New Zealand. At the moment, I'm teaching at Mount Albert Grammar School. So I teach mathematics. As a teacher, I think teaching and learning never separated. For me, I think I'm very lucky. I like learning so much because I was in China, but because of Cultural Revolution, that's in 1960s or 70s, the whole country, the education all just stopped. So since I arrived in New Zealand, I realized I could study. At the moment, I'm doing Masters of Contemporary Education. This program is 3 parts. I started my first part 6 years ago. It's a very well organized program, and the supervisors are wonderful as well, very helpful. And the other things, the time quite flexible. Now I'm in my part 3, and part 3 is a project. So we do personalized learning. For me, it's in particular flipped learning. So students do a lot of work at home, so they kind of a student at center. So they study at home and they bring their question to class. And also, I start a website. So we are in, students can contribute their knowledge, so they can design the questions or Google form or quizzes, so they can, from their point of view, what they think may help others or may help themselves. For me, what my age, if I didn't study this master's, would be challenging, because a lot of teachers at my age, they may not like or they may not confident with technology. But 21st century, you can't say you are teaching without the technology. The good thing about learning with MindLab, I don't think any study could have this opportunity, is you work with old teachers. For the masters, collaboration is a key part of the study, because you hear what other teachers say and you learn from each other. Any other study, they wouldn't have this opportunity. So I do believe if you want to be a good teacher or you like teaching, you should like studying. You should update your knowledge and study all the time.
Okay, welcome back. So first of all, you heard Li Wang talk about being a child in China and coming up to New Zealand during the Chinese Revolution. So you have to have historical context to really understand what she was talking about. See, in the 60s and the 1970s, China experienced a cultural revolution. And at times, education was completely shut down. There were no institutions of higher learning to go to for a while. And so when she left China, she saw possibilities and she saw opportunities to access something that she didn't have access to before. So this created a hunger and a drive in her individually. You may have to spend time with older adults that you're working with and find out what is their passion. What direction do they want to go to in learning? Does it mean going for a promotion or something to enhance their current skill set? And when she talked about leadership support, she talked about how wonderful they were, how supportive, how strong they stood behind her learning, and how available they were. Again, increased communication from leadership is a strong predictor of positive learning outcomes. Now, as far as her project being learner-centered, you saw how Li Wang talked about her students going home and accessing shared websites so they could exchange ideas and come up with questions of their own, which would drive the curriculum that she covered in the classroom. This is certainly a flipped model of education, where we typically have heard of an instructor coming up with ideas and then giving out the plan of learning. But here, students are actively participating in creating or co-creating the class. This is a very important adult learning trait and highly effective. Again, we find that in research, the more participative the adult is in their learning process, the more they get out of their learning. So overall, Li Wang said, technology and learning go hand in hand, and there is no learning without technology. So I hope you understand that how you approach as a learning leader, the entire learning experience, if you see it as positive and you see the things that it can be, this could act as a way to affect and impact your learner's mindset in a positive way. But you need to get to know your learner. And that's what we'll cover next. We're going to talk about learning style and personality and what these things mean for technology learning in the workplace. Now, Lynn Curry in the 80s, another researcher, came up with what she called the onion model of learning style theories. And she said that learning was very complex and multi-layered, like an onion. And the top layer that was most prone to change was the instructional preference. Now, we briefly touched on this with visual, auditory, and kinesthetic preferences, but this also includes how we like to have our information served to us. Do we prefer large room lectures? Think of a TED Talk, something online or face-to-face. Think about small learning teams. Do we prefer those or even independent learning places where we're on our own for certain things? This has been highly contextualized as a layer because it really depends on what you're learning, what the time factors are, how fast you need to learn it, and what proficiency you're looking to develop. But the next layer of learning is how we process information. Now, there are those who process information globally. Give me the high-level general topic and I can get the details on my own. Or some would be analytical, where they enjoy the details and then form ideas about a general concept based on those details. We also get down to the cognitive personality style. And this is that combination I told you about who we are and what we know. But who we are has a huge impact on learning. And so I wanted to share this model, which is also in your handbook. This five principal personality chart called the Big Five comes to us from psychology, but it is important because it impacts learning if we know where people are leaning into the most when it comes to their personality traits, or in other words, which personality trait exerts itself the most in the learning process. So for example, if you have a high degree of openness, you are someone that's open to more novel ideas. New technology doesn't scare you. In the diffusion of innovation theory, we call this the innovators, right? The early adopters. And to the degree that you have a high consciousness of learning, well, you have a strong discipline for learning. You enjoy the details, a program, a structure. You have a good discipline for learning. And if you're high in extroversion, well, we know extroverts are normally talkative, right? More expressive. But in learning, this means that you might ask more questions. You might be more intellectually curious and therefore verbalize that curiosity. To the degree that you are agreeable, we find that you have good teamwork skills, working with others in collaborative learning environments. And finally, the N in this acronym, OCEAN, neuroticism, has to do with our emotional stability. And again, this might have a bit of a negative connotation, but it's not negative at all, because we can't go back and change our learning experiences, but we can be aware of them. And if we can acquire stronger levels of emotional stability regarding learning, and this is especially true if someone comes to the table with some preconceived idea that they can't learn something or they aren't capable of learning, which again, we'll talk to you about the antidote for that is leadership, then we need to create an environment where we can kind of counteract those effects. And a way to know which one of our personality traits is most impacting our learning is to take surveys and to take assessments. So I want to give you two very good tools, the personality and information processing style assessments that might help you gauge your own and those traits in your team. So first of all, The Big Five personality assessment is available in many different forms. And again, you might have other tools for this. You might have a Myers-Briggs survey, the DISC profile, but the Big Five, based on that model I just gave you, will allow you to take, let's say, for example, this quick survey from Truity and give you a score. Now, again, this isn't something to be relied upon solely as the only gauge of personality, and it has been found to be problematic because of its oversimplified nature. But it gives you an idea, for example, in this score sheet, how this person scored very high on openness, not afraid of technology, but scored lower on their conscientiousness. So they might be a little bit scatterbrained and might not know exactly how to get the information. So they might benefit from modules and programs and agendas with checklists on what they need to learn. Another tool is the information processing assessment that I've placed in your handbook as well. Take this survey so you can find out if you lean more towards the globalist or the analyst in the way you process information. And then answer these questions for yourself and have members of your team answer them individually. What are my instructional preferences? Take inventory of those. Do I like small groups, large group learning, independent learning environments? How do I process information based on my survey? And what are some of these personality dimensions that really impact my learning? Well, we've taken in a lot of information in this module, so I want to recap a couple of things for you before we go. Older adult learning dynamics include andragogy principles, those 5 assumptions that Malcolm Knowles talked about. And the learner-centered approach has 7 dimensions that we should explore both for ourselves, take an audit of our material, and get input from our older adults in the workplace. And our cognitive personality style is a complex mix of instructional preferences that we have, information processing tendencies, and personality traits that exert themselves on our learning. Well, I hope this module was very helpful and very informative for you, but we're not done yet. In our last module, we are going to cover the role of leaders in the learning culture. And we're going to give you some practical workplace models that may impact how you design your very next technology training course. So don't go away. Join us for Module 3. Thank you.